Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel, where everything you're about to hear and see has been done in one take. I'm your host, the One Take Man. Today I am once again back on the wrestling match and moments iceberg, which again, ignore the fact that it is misspelled here and that it should be matches and moments. But well, whatever. I've already done videos on each of the first four tiers, but today I want to do something a little more, a little different. Namely, I'm going to be talking about two tiers: the borderline bad or laughable tier and the fucking shit tier. They're both pretty short and they should be quite easy to cover. Also, I imagine they both have a lot of fun stuff for me to talk about, or fun being a uh, fun being a relative term here. Anyway, I've already presented my credentials. You already know what an what an iceberg chart is. Given I'm pretty sure this is not the first time you see one. So let's get into the topic of the video with the look at the borderline bad or laughable tier. Punjabi prison match. Okay, I have to admit I can see why people I can see why people think this is a bad idea, but when it comes to stipulation matches, I'm generally more forgiving than the average crowd. But I do admit this match in particular could use some kind of could use some tweaking. What is a Punjabi prison match, you ask? Well, it is a variation on a cage match where there are two cages present, one that is around the ringside and one that is around the ring. And what distinguishes it somewhat is that both of these cages are made of bamboo, and the inner cage, the one around the ring, can be escaped either through some doors or by climbing over the top, whereas the other one can only be exited by climbing over the top. However, the doors of the inner one are only open for a small period of time, after which they will not be open again. And while I understand the potential that that particular idea has towards escalating the stakes of the match, in practice it doesn't really work that well, and it overcomplicates it. Also, the fact that you can just uh, climb over the top when you already have to climb over the top, in the when it comes to exiting the outer cage. Well, yeah, that really just comes across as overly complicating uh, the whole situation. So so then again, but still, I think this match has good has a good premise, but would use some reworking. Only three such matches have occurred as far as I am aware, and pretty much all of them were bad. So yeah, this would definitely need some reworking. The Rock versus British Bulldog dog poop match. Coincidentally, this is also the sidebar image, and I like this little detail here with the fact that the ref is holding his nose. And in case some of you are wondering, this guy right here, this is Dwayne Johnson. This is what Dwayne Johnson was doing before he became the most well-paid movie star of our days. He had to he so yeah he may be very good looking for his age, or just in general, built like a brick house, and extremely popular and charismatic now, but he had to get there. But before he ended up getting to that point, he went through a whole bunch of at times quite literal shit. And yeah, this is one guy in the match. The other guy in the match, the British Bulldog, is basically a legend in his field, known as one of the best technical wrestlers in the in the history, not maybe not necessarily of the sport, but within the history of the at the time WWF, definitely. And I'm gonna guess these two had a rivalry going, which was aimed at, which ultimately aimed at bringing The Rock just a little bit higher on the totem pole of pro wrestling. And in order to do that, the British Bulldog had to take the L and elevate him. For some reason, the decision, the decision, the decision, I can't talk anymore. This is the second intro and I can't talk anymore. For some reason, the decision to elevate the Rock was made in a match that quite literally involved canine feces. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know how to do. I don't know how to characterize that. Also, Bulldog here is about to be is about to get slammed in this in this dog crap right here. That's what this that's what this move is, and he's in is is going to do. So yeah. Anyway, not a good not a not the best moment in his career. I have to say I'm kind of though I have to say I'm kind of surprised the Kennel from Hell doesn't make hasn't made an appearance so far, or won't really make an appearance throughout this throughout the rest of this Iceberg. Quick little aside to discuss what the Kennel from Hell is about. The Kennel from Hell is kind of a mixture between the this match and this match. It is also a cage match variation where there are two cages, one around the ring and one around the ring side. The difference being these cages are metallic, and in between the cages, and there were supposed to be a whole bunch of very vicious dogs that would attack any wrestler that would fall between them or find their place between the cages. However, when it actually came time to have that match, the dogs themselves were kind of just chilling. Like they didn't even care what was going on, and the commentators kept trying to say, "Oh, just how vicious and how dangerous they were, and just how much trouble the wrestlers would be in if they found themselves there." But the dogs were just like, we're just sitting there, didn't care. Some of them also pooped. So yeah. Anyway, back to the Iceberg itself. 2007 electric steel cage match, Team 3D versus LAX. Going to TNA with this one. Team 3D is was the name the Dudley Brothers tag team. The Dudleys tag team took on when they arrived in TNA, and for a while they were in TNA, they feuded with LAX, a bunch of Mexican American wrestlers. And as part of their feud, they also had an electric steel cage match, i.e., another cage match. The two so far in 3 entries, and with the added quirk that this particular cage was electrified. So some of you might wonder what makes this match borderline bad or laughable. Well, what makes this particular cage match bad is because, well, being electrified doesn't really make for an interesting viewing experience. So even though the idea was that the wrestlers would get electrocuted if they hit the cage, well, that wouldn't necessarily look interesting. So it always had to be within a match. It always had to be exaggerated, either by launching small explosions from the cage, or by having them just kind of cartoonishly hold it and then jitter, which yeah. You can very much do, environmental hazards within a wrestling environment, and in fact, that's one of the things I praised Lucha Underground for in my review of its first season, just how effectively it was able to use its environment. But this match was not an effective use of the environment within a wrestling context. Moving on, AEW Revolution. Kenny Omega versus Jon Moxley, failed explosion. I have to admit, I haven't really watched AEW all that much. I do know of their reputation, and I know just what kind of people they've got there and how effective those guys can be. And two of the most effective are actually Kenny Omega and Jon Moxley. They had a they had a match which, as far as I can tell, was pretty good. And yes, it was at AW Revolution. However, during that, how it seems during that match, there was supposed to be um, an explosion that didn't happen. My guess is one of these guys was supposed to throw the other guy into something, and then that something would, explode or launch fireworks or something like that. But that but that didn't happen. So they just kind of stood there awkwardly for waiting for something to happen. Anyway, it was, if anything, a lull in what I've been told is an otherwise decent match. So whether or not it counts as being borderline bad or laughable is really up to interpretation. For my mind, I would say it isn't. 7. 7 is a gimmick portrayed by a Dustin Rhodes, the same guy behind the Goldust gimmick, which is much more popular. And before his debut, there were a whole bunch of vignettes about him being kind of a creeper and stalking children going to bed at night. So that's very much preying on that fear of him being kind of a boogeyman, except real. And then when it came time for him to actually debut, instead of actually going with the script, he instead decided to go on a rant about how about how the management of WCW, which tried to push this gimmick at the time, was absolutely horrendous and uh, and creatively bankrupt, and led to crap like such gimmicks getting shown on TV. Yeah, unsurprisingly, this particular idea didn't have much of a staying power, which is why I think aside from that one appearance, when that one promo, Seven pretty much disappeared from WCW broadcasting. Gilbert is another part of this time a jab at WCW rather than WCW themselves doing something bad, and namely it was a jab by their direct competitor, the WWF. Now, these guys, as I said, they were competitors, so they would frequently try to pull off jabs at each other's expense. But this is one that really crashed and burned. To be more precise, Gilbert is a jab at Goldberg, who was at the time one of the stars of WCW, a guy who had a somewhat limited move repertoire, but was otherwise very impressive. As in, he had a great physical presence, and WCW knew how to market him, knew how to make him look dominant and menacing. And the WWF decided to take that marketing and put it on a guy who was absolutely scrawny, and make him do all kinds of cartoonish exaggerations of the kind of mannerisms Goldberg would typically do. This backfired tremendously because, as I said, Goldberg was one of the ECW stars and one of their most popular attractions, whereas Gilbert was just kind of meh. It was just pointless. World War III, aka Clusterfuck Battle Royale. Another unusual match type, and it is another cage match variation. World War III is a match type involving 60 different wrestlers within 2 different rings, both of which were surrounded by one single cage, and those guys would fight across the 2 rings, would try to and would subsequently eliminate each other out of the match. However, because there are a whole bunch of people, and there is a freaking mesh, the cage itself, between the performers and the camera, it can become really chaotic to tell um, who is who's doing what against whom. It is very hard to track, really, gauge the progression of this match. Now, this could work if you're trying to really sell the impression of a fight. However, I'm assuming the creator of this Iceberg wasn't really a fan of the way of the way this was presented, which, fair enough. The idea could potentially be improved, but I really can't think of any way. So I'm just gonna mention it and move on. My whole Nia Jax. This one, this one is an interesting one, I have to say, or rather, not really. Nia Jax is somewhat notorious within the uh, within among fans of modern wrestling, because she is because she is very well known for being rough on her opponents, as in handling them roughly when she really shouldn't, and that led to a whole bunch of injuries. And then at one point during the match, probably through a mistake of her own, she loudly shouted "my hole," which was quite ridiculous, as you might imagine. Anyway, moving along. Mr. T versus Roddy Piper. Piper, not Pipper. Anyway, not commenting on typos. For this one, going back to the WWF and going some 40 years back. I don't know how many of the audience will remember Mr. T, but he was a quite striking presence, at least in the early 80s, and and the fans of the Rocky movies might know him as Clubber Lang from Rocky 3. He was involved in entertainment in that time, in a variety of different ways. And Roddy Piper was one of the most popular wrestlers of the era, as in he had created a lot of in interesting moments, and knew how to keep himself relevant and noteworthy in the changing and somewhat volatile wrestling landscape that was around from the late 70s to the mid 90s. Let's put it that way. And naturally, these two larger than life figures ended up being on a collision course. They even had a match at, I think, the first WrestleMania. And no, they were in a match at the first WrestleMania, but they also had tag team partners. However, by this entry, I think they mean, I'm not sure if this entry means the feud they had or an individual match they had. Anyway, if this refers to an individual match, I haven't seen it, but I assume it's bad, which is why it's here. If they're talking about the feud, well, let's just say there are others from that age that are more well remembered. All Vince Russo pole matches. This one will require a little bit of an explanation. I don't know if I've ever mentioned who Vince Russo was or is. I can tell you he worked as a booker, as in someone who would set up matches and storylines for a company. A lot of the storylines he did arrange were somewhat cartoonish, exaggerated, and often quite ridiculous. And that kind of reflects in the way he sets up matches. And he is a very well known fan of pole matches. And by pole matches, I mean a match where you have a pole in a corner of the ring, and on top of the pole there is some kind of item that the wrestler has to retrieve. That's a very simple setup that makes for some very simple payoff. However, at times the things that would be put up on pole matches would be outright ridiculous. And that led to Vince Russo himself being a quite notorious and and quite ridiculous figure, especially when he was at the peak of his popularity in the late '90s, early 2000s. Moving on, Lita and Edge in-ring sex scene. Seriously, this thing is here, but the Kennel from Hell isn't. Anyway, uh, we're going back to the WWE. So, to the same company where this one, not just same company, also same time as this entry, and discussing about two somewhat controversial figures, Lita and Edge, who at the time of this particular scene were the WWE champion and the women's champion of the WWE, respectively. And they decided they would celebrate this by having an in-ring sex celebration, because Edge's because for two reasons. Namely, one of Edge's monikers was the rated R superstar, as in he would do some crazy extreme things. And Lita was also known for being quite crazy and extreme herself. So yeah, naturally they would do something like this. However, the actual sex itself didn't, if it happened at all, which it didn't, happened first of all under covers. Second of all, it was interrupted, I think, twice, and it was in a segment that was more or less ridiculous, especially now looking back on it. Junkyard Dog versus Moondog Spot. No ref in the match. Again, I have little clue, little idea of what this refers to. However, I can say something about the Junkyard Dog, who was a very popular wrestler at the time, and and the only way, however, that was solely due to just how charismatic the performer was, because the gimmick itself kind of had no staying power. Why did the gimmick have no staying power? He was a black guy. He was a collared black guy with a chain attached to his collar. Like, yeah, wrestling before the '90s was weird and not always in a good way. As for who Moondog is, I have no clue. But let me just say that the Junkyard Dog was was infinitely better known than, or rather, is infinitely better known than this guy, and that is solely because of how charismatic the performer was. Because, as I said, the gimmick is bad. I'm pretty sure it was considered bad even at the time, but no one really said anything because, well, they just wanted to see the performer. And last but not least, in the borderline bad or laughable tier, we have Muhammad Ali versus Antonio Inoki. Muhammad Ali, I think, needs no introduction. He is one of the most well-known professional boxers of all time. And Antonio Inoki, at least in Japan. Oh wait, it's Antonio Inoki. Fuck. Damn, this iceberg really is riddled with spelling errors. Anyway, Antonio Inoki is, at least in Japan, one of the most well-known wrestlers of all time, if not the most. And there was talk about getting these guys in a match together, not just because of East versus West, but also because it was the wrestling guy against the boxing guy. So this encounter is widely regarded as one of the first mixed martial arts fights ever. Also, Antonio had some credentials in authentic um, in authentic combat sports, so to speak. So he knew how to defend himself. So he could fight for real as well as fight for show. The problem with this match, and the reason why it's in this tier, is that as part of the contract for this match, Antonio was not allowed to use any holds or throws in a match. therefore leaving him with quite a bit of a disadvantage when it came down to fighting, with his own bare fists against the against the best fist fighter on the planet at the time. So what did he? So instead throughout the match, he just kind of laid on his back and tried to uh, kick Ali, which, yeah, that led to the match itself being quite bad and not being really uh, interesting or noteworthy in and of itself, but more as a historical moment. Nevertheless, the two guys actually got along very well. They became best of friends. Antonio Inoki actually became a Muslim after interacting with Muhammad Ali. Took on the name Muhammad Hassan Inoki, and under that name, if I am not mistaken, he became the first Muslim within Japanese government. He was appointed the Minister of Youth and Sport in 2013, if I'm not mistaken. So, also, as I've said, this is widely regarded as one of the first MMA fights in history. So there are lots of good things that spawned from this match, even if the match itself isn't good, like objectively not good. Anyway, let's move on. We got the tier 6 fucking shit. This one will be quite a doozy, so strap in. TNA Victory Road 2011. Jeff Hardy versus Sting. This match, this was the main event of the Victory Road pay-per-view that TNA put out in 2011, and it was for the TNA World Championship. Held at the time by Jeff Hardy, challenged by Sting. The thing is, oh fuck, okay, that disappeared. Never mind. The thing is, Jeff Hardy showed up in that match absolutely wasted. So like drugged out of his mind. There was no way he could perform. So the match itself only lasted like 30 seconds at best. It was just Sting. Pinning him as quickly as he could just to get it over with. I think Hardy got himself suspended and then was forced to go into rehab after that particularly shameful display of his lack of professionalism. Moving on, the WWF Brawl for All. This one is quite notorious within the wrestling community, and even fans of the Attitude Era when this thing took place genuinely have a strong dislike for it. Why? Because it was a boxing tournament in the middle of a pro wrestling company, and it was fraught with a whole bunch of logistical difficulties that made everything about this lots of things about this quite difficult, not just to watch, but also to put together. And it was overall uninteresting, dragged on. Like it was just bad. It was just bad, believe me. Gerald Briscoe versus Pat Patterson, hardcore evening gown match. Oh boy. Let's get a little bit of ageism and homophobia in here. Why not? An evening gown match is exactly what it sounds like. Your opponent is in an evening gown, and while you are also in an evening gown, and the aim is to get your opponent out of the evening gown while you yourself trying to stay in the evening gown. The fact that this was also hardcore means that you could use any means to do so, but that does not necessarily make the premise that much better. And what makes it even worse is that the match was fought between two guys who were, at the time, quite old and not particularly athletic. So even if they were, even if they would have been capable of putting on a good match, they would not have been capable of putting on a good match under this particular under this particular stipulation. So yeah, it was bad. It was just bad. 2007 TNA Reverse Battle Royal. 2 of 4 entries so far come from TNA. Like that should be something. Okay, there's an ambulance passing by. I don't know if you can hear it, but it's distracting. Okay, and it's passed on. Normally I would just edit this out, but one take. Anyway, let's get back to this. 2007 TNA Reverse Battle Royale. The fact that 2 entries out of the 4 so far in this tier are from TNA really really tells something about its quality from 2007 to about 2012 2013 actually. Not really sure what, but that's a secondary question. Well, so some of you might be wondering, what is a reverse battle royale? Well, a typical battle royale involves the opponents trying to throw each other out of the ring. This time, whereas in this match, whereas this match was all about trying to get into the ring and prevent your opponents from doing so. That resulted in a lot of people having to pretend, getting into the ring is freaking hard when in fact they do it all the time. I think the idea was that they should get in the ring over the top rope, but still they should not find it as they should not find that difficult, and it should not be in that much of a challenge to where you could really build a match out of it. So yeah, as a result, this whole match really looked very bad. Was really pushing suspension of disbelief. Let's put it this way. James Storm versus Chris Harris, TNA blindfold cage match. Again, TNA, what was wrong with you at the time? Anyway, James Storm and Chris Harris had a tag team together and were actually a quite popular tag team for a long time. But eventually, it was decided that the management decided that they should split the team up and push one of the two. I think Chris Harris. And however, in order to split the two, they first had to have a good reason, and that good reason was these guys suddenly couldn't get along and started a feud. That feud led to them having a blindfolded cage match. I don't think I need to explain what cage matches are. I already did once. As in there is a match where there is a cage. However, this time, aside from the match being inside a cage, the wrestlers themselves are also blindfolded. As in, this is part of a particular brag people make, like I can beat you with my eyes closed or something like that. Well, this time it was decided both guys would get their would have their eyes closed while fighting, or forced closed, and also fight in a steel cage. So not only was it harder to see for the audience, it was also impossible to see for the performers, which led to them just kind of touching around, trying to and waste a lot of time trying to find where the other was, and yeah, not a great and did not make for an interesting dynamic or fast-paced match that kind of could really elevate a feud. So yeah, not necessarily something worth not something that was worth repeating. 2006 December to Dismember. Going back to the WWE, more precisely the tail end of 2006 with the December to Dismember pay-per-view, which if I'm not mistaken was the only pay-per-view of their at the time third brand, ECW. Or rather the only or rather yeah, it's safe to say, call it the only pay-per-view. Why was it? And if you watch it intently, you'll realize why this was the only ECW pay-per-view. First of all, it barely lasted uh, it barely lasted 2 hours. Second of all the matches there were bad for a wide variety of reasons. Well, okay, almost all the matches were bad, but overall, the ECW brand, WWE's ECW brand, especially in its beginning, was fraught with a whole bunch of problems as they were trying to figure out their identity, and they wanted to. And this match was not the most constructive step in not the most constructive step towards really settling on what it is that ECW is supposed to be like. Don Valentine versus Chris Champion. Not a match I'm aware of, but I assume it was uh, equally as bad as the other matches that have been mentioned so far. Anyway, moving along. Sting versus Tony Palmore. I I know who Sting is, and funnily enough, he shows up for the second time here. Sting is actually a pretty good wrestler, but however, he's been around for so long that some of the things he's been involved with are just bound to be bad via the law of averages. As for Tony Palmore, I have no clue who he is, so I'm gonna guess he's the guy who made this match this bad or this noteworthy for being bad. But as for what exactly happened, I really can't say. Seth Rollins versus The Fiend, Hell in a Cell DQ finish. Again, only one end, but I often say I'm gonna stop pointing out spelling errors, but I can't. But I can't stop myself. Anyway, the match itself. Hell in a Cell is another variation on a cage match. This time the cage being around the ringside, so not around the ring, around the ringside itself. It still has the effect of enclosing the two wrestlers, and both of these guys are two of the guys that pretty much defined the WWE of the 2010s. And this was, if I'm not mistaken, the second match of the Fiend gimmick, a gimmick that was on the rise, and that really should have, and it was really supposed to be, made, made that much better or improved. And Seth Rollins was the guy who was chosen to help, to perhaps help elevate the gimmick, or just bury it. I don't know. And it was decided that these two would have a match at Hell in a Cell for various reasons. Hell in a Cell is aside from a cage match, it's a match that allows for no DQ, no count out. The only way to win is either by referee stoppage, pinfall, or submission. And given that this match was a DQ finish, you can imagine a lot of people called bullshit and absolutely uh, and absolutely tore into this match. It is not a dark moment in pro wrestling history, but it is a very but it is a very unpleasant one, and a true mark of inconsistency, at least within the last 10 years. My Veg, Shelly Martinez versus Rebel. I imagine this is My Whole 2.0, as in one of these two ladies was somewhat notorious for being unable to wrestle, and then something like this, and then one of them pulls an audible during the match because they got injured somehow around, or they got hurt somewhere around uh, around their vag, which, yeah, audibles are audibles are never a sign of professionalism, to be honest. And last but not least, Heroes of Wrestling pay-per-view. the sidebar image, coincidentally. Heroes of Wrestling, the pay-per-view, was a pay-per-view featuring a lot of wrestlers who were past their prime. It was supposed to be a one-off event, which was independently organized, if I'm not mistaken. However, the only people who they could have afforded were people who really had no business wrestling anymore, and therefore all of the matches are bad, and in fact are notoriously bad, and therefore the pay-per-view as a whole was also notoriously bad. Yeah, there's not much more to say to it. And yet, this has been the content for this video. Join me next time when I'm going to close out the iceberg by looking at the final 2 tiers. Until then, however, thank you for your attention. If you enjoyed this video, then please leave a like, and maybe even share it wherever you think other people will like it as well. If you have anything you'd like to add to any part of what I said, the comment section awaits your input. And if you want to see when my next video gets released, well then please subscribe. Ideally also ring the bell or do whatever else YouTube will ask of you in order to keep you notified. I also have a second channel where I talk about more bookish or literature topics, so if that sounds interesting to you, you can find it right down in the description below, right past my social media, which I also suggest you check out should you feel so inclined. Until next time, I have been the One Take Man.